They made their way back through the corridors of the abandoned mall, not bothering to be cautious with their two footsteps or the beams of their lights. So how much for being sneaky? Charlie said darkly, but no one responded. By sudden Constance, their pace quickened steadily. By the time they reached the parking lot, they were almost running, spotting her car as they came to the front door. Charlie felt an almost physical relief to see it like it was an old friend. Someone should stay here, she said, pausing with her hand on the door handle. We can't leave Carson. No, Marla said firmly. We're leaving now. They looked at her in surprise for a moment. Suddenly, she was talking to them all the way she talked to Jason. Sister knows best. Lamar and Jason exchanged glances, but no one said anything. We're going into town, all of us, she added, giving Charlie a warning look, and we're finding help. They hurried into their cars. As Charlie took the wheel, John got into the passenger seat and she smiled tightly at him. Jessica climbed into the back a moment later, and Charlie felt a minor disappointment. She wanted to talk to him alone. We're running for help. It's not a date, she scolded herself, but that hadn't really been the point. He felt safe, a touchstone, and amid the strange things that were happening all around them. She looked over at him, but he was staring out the window. They pulled out of the lot, following Marla's car as she sped into the darkness. When they reached the town, Marla yanked her car into the side of the main street and stopped, and Charlie followed suit, but the car had finally came to the halt. Jessica leaped out of the back seat and started running. Marla followed a step behind. They stopped in front of the movie theater, and only then did Charlie see that there was a cop in a uniform beneath the marquee, leaning back against his black and white car. His eyes wide at the sight of the young women barreling toward him, and he took an involuntary step back as Marla started talking about passing for breath. Please, you gotta come. Marla was finishing as the others caught up. The cop looked a little bewildered. He had a shiny pink face, and his hair was too short and was entirely covered by his hat. He was young, maybe mid 20s. Charlie realized that he was looking at them skeptically. Is this an actual emergency? He said. You may not realize it, but pranks can get you into real trouble. Jessica rolled her eyes and stepped forward, closing the distance between them. We're not playing a prank, she said crisply, and Shelley suddenly remembered how tall she was. Our friend is trapped in an abandoned shopping mall, and it's our job to help us. The shopping mall? He seemed confused, then looked in the direction they came from. That shopping mall? His eyes widened. Then he frowned at them reproachfully, looking remarkably like a disappointed parent despite his youth. What are you doing up there in the first place? Charlie and Marla exchanged glances, but Jessica didn't blink. Deal with us later. He's in danger, and you have to help us, officer. She leaned in and patted his name tag. Officer Doohan, do you want me to go into the fire department? Despite her fear, Charlie almost laughed. Jessica said it was if she wore in the store, threatening to take her business elsewhere. It was so absurd it should have gotten her no more than a puzzled glance. But John reached for his radio hastily. No, he said, hang on. He pressed the button on the radio and made a short burst of static. Charlie felt a brief chill in the sound as she looked around. She saw John stiffen and Jason take a tiny step closer to Mala, not seeming to notice their reactions. Dune barked incomprehensible sounds into his radio, talking in cup code. And Charlie suddenly had a flash of memory of running around the yard, whispering into walkie-talkies with Marla. They would never understand each other on the cheap toys her father had found at the drugstore bargains bin, but they didn't mind. Actual communication was never the point. Charlie, come on, Jessica shouted at her, and Charlie came back to herself. Everyone was heading toward the cars and pulling back in. Marla pulled out in front, and the cop followed her. with Charlie bringing up the rear. Why doesn't he have the siren on? Jessica said. Her voice was thin and brittle as if her only choices were a sharp tongue or tears. He doesn't believe us, Dunn said softly. He should have the siren on, Jessica said, and this time it was almost a whisper. Charlie's knuckles were white in the steering wheel as she stared straight ahead at the cop's red taillights. When they got back to the mall, Jessica dashed ahead, forcing the rest of them to run behind her. Charlie didn't mind, it felt good to run. Purposeful, Lamar was talking to the cop as they ran, shouting over the noise of their thundering feet. The restaurant is all boarded up, but there's a door left open, he said, the words broken by his uneven breathing. Behind the plastic, you move it. Dark alley. Colton smells like feet. Officer Doone's step stuttered briefly, but he regained his stride. When they reached the alley, he slowed their pace, moving more cautiously down the narrow hall until they came to the door. Right here, John said, and Jim moved forward to help with the shelf. They drew it back too fast, the contents rattling and wobbling. The shelf pitched backward, and the tools, kibbles, and paint cans full of nails crashed to the floor. Ow! John called as the hammer bounced off his foot. They all watched as the things scattered, some rolling away and vanishing down the dark corridor. What? Jason wailed, and they all looked up from the hall. He was pointing at the door. What is this? Marley gasped. The door had chains strung across it from top to bottom. 3 enormous padlocks holding them all together. The links were bolted into the metal frame of the door, and they were heavy, too heavy to cut without special tools. It was all rusty. The whole thing looked as though it had been there for years. Shirley walked up to the door and touched a chain, as if it were sure it was real. This wasn't here, she said, the words sounding insane as if she spoke. We have to get him out, Jason cried heatedly, his eyes covering his hands covering his eyes. Bunny is going to kill him and it's my fault. What's he talking about? The police officer said, looking at them with pronounced suspicion. Who is Bunny and why is she going to hurt your friend? He's a robot, Charlie said quickly. The robots from Freddy Fazbear's are still here and they still work. Freddy Fazbear's, Dune's face flashed and they looked at the door again. I used to go there as a kid, he said softly, his tone caught between nostalgia and fear. He calmed himself quickly and cleared his throat. He came to life, Jason insisted, no longer making the effort to hide his tears. John bent down to his height, his tone softening. What's your name? He asked. We have to get him out, Jason repeated. His name is Jason, Martha said, and Jason glared at her. Jason, Dern said. He put a hand on Jason's shoulder, glancing at the others with an obvious suspicion. He thinks we made him say that, Charlie realized. Jason wriggled in Jones' grasp, but the officer did not let him go, looking him in the eye as to ask the next question. Jason, what did they tell you to say this? What's going on here? Irritated, Jason pulled free and took a large step. That's really what happened, he said firmly. Officer Jones exhaled, a long, slow vent of frustration, then got to his feet, shading his kid-friendly act. So the robots are their friend, he said. I know what you're trying to pull, said his tone. We were in there, Charlie said flatly, keeping her voice level as if saying that calmly and plainly enough might convince them that they were not telling lies. Our friend didn't make it out. The officer looked again at the chains. Look, he said, apparently deciding to give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't know how you got in there in the first place, and right now I don't want to know. But the machinery in here is old, and it hasn't been touched in 10 years. Chances are it's pretty spooky. Heck, I wouldn't want to go in there. So even though I can't blame you for being freaked out, I can guarantee you those robots in there aren't moving by themselves. That place is dead and needs to be left alone. He said with a forced chuckle. Jason said his job, but he didn't say anything. I think you all need to go home. Dylan finished. The statement sounded more like a threat than advice. They looked at one another. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, Jessica looked at Charlie. Those chains aren't there before, right? She faltered, looking back at her friends for confirmation, like she was beginning to doubt her own memory. No, Charlie said instantly. They weren't. We weren't leaving, and we need your help. Fine, Jones said shortly. What's his name? He produced a notebook, seemingly from nowhere. Carlton Burke, Jessica said. She was about to spell it for him. Then suddenly, Iverson Dawn put down his pen and closed his eyes, his nostrils flaring. He glared at them, no longer looking quite so young. I'm going to have to give you one more chance. Tell me exactly what happened. He spoke slowly, emphasizing the spaces between his words. He was in control again, no longer out of his depth, like he was suddenly understood everything. They tried to explain all at once, talking over one another. Jessica's voice was loudest and calmest, but even she could not keep her anxiety from bleeding through. Charlie hung back quietly. Tell me exactly what happened. Where they were supposed to start. With the night, with the week, with the Michael. Like the first time her father picked up a circuit board. How was anyone ever to respond to something like, tell me what happened? The cop was nodding and he picked up the radio again, but this time he spoke comprehend, ugh, comprehensibly. Nora, call Burke. It's his kid. I'm up at the old mall site. There was an answering burst of static, and the officer turned his attention back to them. Come on, he said. Come on, where? John said. Off the property. Marla started to protest, but Joan interrupted. I'm escorting you off the property, he said. He pulled the baton from his belt and pointed with it. Come on, Lamar said. Jason was still staring sternly at the ground, and Lamar gave him a gentle nudge on the shoulder. Jason, come on. We have to do what he says now, okay? But Carlton, Jason said loudly, and Lamar shook his head. I know. It's okay. We'll find him, but we have to go now. He guided Jason toward the mouth of the alley, and everyone followed. The police officer walked behind, following Charlie a little too closely. She split up, but so did he, and she resigned herself to being shadowed. When they got to the parking lot, he directed them to wait by the car and walked off a few paces, speaking into the radio again, too far away to hear. What's going on? Jason said. He was beginning to whine. He heard the tone in his voice and tried to modulate it. I'm not a little kid, he reminded himself. No one answered, but Marla rubbed his back absently, and he did not move away. Long minutes passed in silence. Jessica sat in the hood of the car, facing away from the rest of the group. Sorry. Charlie wanted to go to her, but she did not. In her distress, Jessica was closing down, going stiff and cold and snippy, and Charlie did not think she had what it took to break through that without breaking down herself. What's he talking about? Carlton's dad? Charlie asked, but no one had time to answer. Headlights appeared and a car pulled in beside them. The man who got it was tall and thin, and his light hair could have been either blonde or gray. Carlton's dad, Molly whispered. A late answer in Charlie's question. The man smiled as he approached. Carlton's dad, he confirmed. Though since they're all grown up now, you better call me Clay. They all muttered it, half in a greeting, half just to test it out. Just to cover his mouth self-cautiously, tonguing the invisible gap in his molars. I thought our days of mischief would be behind us, no? Clay said, his expression good-humored. Jessica slid off the hood of Charlie's car, her face drawn. I'm so sorry, he was missing, she said tightly. I don't know what happened. He was right with us. Bonnie kidnapped him, Jason put out. I saw it. The rabbit took him. Clay started to smile, then stopped himself when he saw their faces. Oh, kids, I'm sorry. You haven't been around in a while. I'm afraid Carlton is playing a joke on you. All of you. What? Lamar said. Oh, come on. With you guys back in town? He couldn't resist, Clay said. Whatever happened, I guarantee he set it up. He'll probably pop out of the bushes any time now. There's a silence as they all waited against. Probably nothing happened. Well, Clay said at last. What would have been too much to ask? Come on, why don't you have to come back to our place? I'll make you all some hot chocolate, and then Carlton finally shows up, and you can tell him he's grounded. Okay, Charlie said, without waiting for the consent of the others. She wanted to believe Clay, wanting to believe that Carlton was alright, and would show up laughing. But almost as badly, she wanted to go somewhere where an adult was in charge. Someone who would make hot chocolate and assure him there was no such thing as monsters. Her father's Her father had never made that claim. Her father could never have told her that lie. No one objected, and so they started up their covering again. Trailing Clay home, they all settled into their accustomed places. Charlie, John, and Jessica in Charlie's car, and Marla and Jason and Lamar in Marla's car. In the review mirror, Charlie saw Officer Dune's car still right behind him. Is he just going this way, or is he making sure we go where we're told? She wondered, but it didn't really matter. They weren't planning on flight. At Carlton's house, they followed in through the front door. Charlie looked back in time to see the police car drive on by. He was following us. As they climbed the steps, John leaned in to whisper in her ear. I didn't realize how rich you were when I was a kid, he said, and she stood with a laugh. It was true. The house was enormous. It was 3 stories high and it sprawled out into the woods that surrounded it. So wide that Charlie thought that there must have been whole rooms where you all could see out the window was trees. Clay showed them into the living room, which looked well used. The furniture mismatched and the rugs, dark and durable, made the stains. Carlton's mom, who you want to call Betty now, is asleep, Clay said. That soundproofing is pretty good. Just don't shout or crash around. They cherished promise. And he nodded, satisfied, and vanished through a doorway. They dispersed themselves over the furniture, sitting on couches and chairs. Charlie sat on the rug between Jessica's chair and Lamar's. She wanted them all to stay close together. John sat down beside her and gave a little smile. Did we get pranked? Marla asked. I guess, maybe. I'm not sure what else would explain it. Jessica said listlessly, staring into the empty fireplace. I mean, none of us even knows each other that well. Not really. Maybe he would do something like that. They all shifted uncomfortably. It was true. They had been behaving as if their time apart was just a little break. Like they had just filled another Anna what they've been up to and will be just like it was, just like the group had never split up. But 10 years was too long for that to be true, and deep down everyone knew. Charlie darted her eyes at John. She felt a little embarrassment, but she could not have expressed why. Clay came back in, carrying a tray of steaming mugs and a little bag of little marshmallows. Here you are, he said joyfully. Hot chocolate for everyone, even me. He set the tray down on the office table and took a seat in a battered green armchair that seemed to fit him like a coat. As accustomed to his body as it was its form, they reached forward and took the cups. Only Jason reached for the marshmallows. Clay looked around from face to face. Look, he said, I know you don't believe me, but Carlton does these things like this. Although I have to admit, this is probably the weirdest. It's not right making you relive all that stuff from when you were kids. He stared into his mug for a long moment. I need to have another talk with them, he said quietly. Believe me, Mustang had a strange sense of humor, he went on. You know, for high school, we sent him to a place in the next town over. No one knew him. He managed to convince his classmates and his teachers that he had a twin brother at the school for the first month of class. I don't know how on earth he managed it, but I didn't find it until he got tired of the act and I started getting calls from school that one of my sons had gone missing. Charlie smiled weakly, but she was not convinced. This was different. This is different, Marla said as if reading Charlie's mind. Jason saw him disappear. He was terrified. It's cruel if it was a prank. If it's a prank. Sorry. Marla shook her head with anger and stretched her nails against the portion of the cup. If it's a prank, she repeated in a softer tone. She looked at Charlie, her face stormy, and Charlie knew that if Carlton had, in fact, set all of this up, Marla would never speak to him again. The happy reunion was over. Yes, Clay said. I know, but he doesn't see it that way. He took a sip of cocoa, searching for words. The twins, they had totally different personalities. Sean was this outgoing, cheerful guy. He was on the debate team. He played soccer for goodness sake. Colton had never gotten near a sports game without being forced. I don't know how he kept it up. Still, Marla said, but she sounded less convinced. The worst part was, Clay went on, talking more to himself than to the teenagers. Sean had a girlfriend. She really liked him too, but he was just playing the part. Poor girl had been dating a guy who didn't even exist. I think he was surprised when he realized how upset people were. He gets carried away and just assumes everyone is having as much fun as he is. Charlie looked at John and he made her glance anxiously. We don't know each other, not really. Maybe he did set it up, she said aloud. Maybe, Jessica echoed. I saw him, Jessica said loudly. Before anyone can respond, he stormed out of the room, disappearing through the doorway. Mother stood automatically and moved to follow him, but Clay put up a hand. Let him go, he said. He needs some time to himself, and I want to talk to the rest of you. He set his mug down and leaned forward. I know you were just kidding around, but I don't want you to hear you kids joking about Freddy Fazbear's. You know, I wasn't the chief back then. I was a detective. And I was working on those disappearances. To this day, it was the worst thing I ever had to see. Excuse me. It's not something to joke about. He looked at Charlie. His gray eyes were hard and the lines of his face were immobile. He was no longer the friendly father figure but the police chief, staring as if he could see right through her. Charlie had a sudden urge to confess, but she had nothing to confess to. I'm especially surprised at you, Charlie, Clay said quietly. Charlie blushed, shame rising up in her with a flush of heat. She wanted to protest, to explain herself, to say anything that might soften the eyes that seemed to bore into her skull. Instead, she ducked her head and muttered an indistinct apology. Lamar broke the silence. Mr. Burke, Clay, did they ever find out who did it? I thought they arrested somebody. Clay didn't respond for a long moment. He was still looking at Charlie, and she felt as he were trying to tell her something, or else reading something in her face. Clay, Marla said, and he seemed to come back to himself. He looked around the group, his expression dark. Yes, he said quietly, we did arrest someone. I did, in fact, and I'm sure now that he was guilty as I was then. So what happened? Lamar asked. There was a hush among the group as if something was important was about to happen. There were no bodies, Clay Burke said. We knew it was him. There was no doubt in my mind, but the children had disappeared and they were never found, and without their bodies, he stopped talking, staring off into the middle distance as if scarcely aware that they were there. But kidnapping, Charlie said. They disappeared. She was suddenly furious, appalled at the obvious injustice. How can this man be walking around somewhere? What if he does it again? She felt Marla's head in her arm and she nodded, settling back, trying to calm down, but the anger was still there inside. Sitting under the surface of her skin, Clay was looking at her with something like curiosity in his eyes. Charlie, he said, justice penalizes the guilty, but it must also protect the innocent. It means that sometimes the guilty get away with terrible things, but It is the price we pay. He sounded grave, his words weighty.